Imagine you're living in the early 20th century, in a land promised as a homeland to two different communities. Welcome to Palestine. Now picture the world as it was in the early part of the 20th century. There was an air of change, a mix of hope and uncertainty. This was a time when empires ruled, borders were fluid, and national identities were being forged. In this turbulent era, the British Empire held sway over large parts of the globe, including a region known as Palestine, located in the heart of the Middle East. This land, steeped in history and revered by three major religions, was about to become a stage for a conflict that would echo through the ages. The British, fresh from their victory in World War I, were now the rulers of Palestine. They held the power, and with it, they held the promises. Promises of a homeland to two different communities, the Jews and the Arabs. Enter the Balfour Declaration of 1917, a document that pledged British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was a promise that ignited hope in Jewish communities worldwide, many of whom had faced persecution for centuries. But it also ignited fear and resentment among the Arab Palestinians, who considered this the same land their ancestors had lived on for generations. The Arab Palestinians saw this promise as a betrayal. They feared being displaced, becoming strangers in their own land. They strongly opposed the idea of Jewish immigration, setting the stage for an escalating conflict. Fast forward to 1947. And the United Nations is proposing a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Jewish leadership accepts, Arab leadership rejects. The stage is set for a conflict that will last for generations. As we delve deeper into this historical narrative, we'll attempt to unravel the intricate web of promises, betrayals, and enduring tensions that have defined the region for generations. This is the beginning of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A conflict that remains unresolved to this day, a testament to the complexity of history and the human condition. As Jewish immigration increased, the Arab Palestinians feared for their ancestral lands. The early 20s were a period of uneasy calm, as the British mandate over Palestine took effect. Yet beneath the surface, the seeds of discord were being sown. Jewish immigrants poured into the region, driven by the dream of establishing a homeland, a sanctuary from the persecution they had faced in Europe. They bought lands, they built homes, they planted roots. The Zionist movement was in full swing, and the vision of a Jewish state in Palestine was slowly turning into a reality. But this influx was not met without resistance. The Arab Palestinians, who had lived on these lands for generations, watched with growing unease as the landscape of their homeland began to change. They saw the influx of Jewish immigrants not as peaceful settlers, but as invaders threatening to displace them from their ancestral lands. The British, on one hand, had pledged to facilitate the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. On the other hand, they had also promised the Arabs that they would be allowed to maintain their majority status in Palestine. These conflicting promises were like two trains running on the same track, destined to collide. The Arab Palestinians expressed their opposition through protests, strikes, and in some cases, violent uprisings. The British responded with a heavy hand, attempting to quell the unrest. But the more they squeezed, the more the resentment grew. The conflicting promises, the fears of displacement, the increasing tensions, they all added fuel to the smoldering fire. And then in the late 40s, it finally happened. The United Nations proposed a partition plan intending to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, while the Arab leaders rejected it. The stage was set for a showdown, and the world held its breath. The seeds of resentment were sown, and they would soon bear bitter fruit. The conflict was about to escalate, and the region would never be the same again. The tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface were about to explode into a full-blown war. The land of promises was on the brink of becoming a land of betrayals. 1947 brings a new player to the scene, the United Nations, with a plan in hand. The world had watched the tensions rise between Jewish immigrants and Arab Palestinians, and it was clear that a solution was needed. Enter the United Nations Partition Plan, This plan proposed a division of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, each with their own independence and sovereignty. The Jewish leadership, led by David Ben-Gurion, welcomed the plan with open arms. For them, it represented an opportunity to establish a homeland they had longed for. However, the Arab leaders saw things differently. They believed the plan disregarded the rights of Palestinian inhabitants and rejected it outright. This conflicting acceptance and rejection created a chasm that was impossible to bridge. The stage was set for a clash that would echo across the decades. With tensions running high and both sides holding firm to their stances, the fires of conflict were about to be stoked. 1948, a year that would forever change the landscape of the Middle East. As the United Nations Partition Plan took shape, the State of Israel was declared, a moment that marked a turning point in the narrative of this contentious land. What followed was a series of events that would leave an indelible mark on the region and its people. The ink was barely dry on the declaration when the first war broke out. The Arab nations surrounding Israel refused to recognize its existence, leading to a conflict that was as much about territory as it was about identity and belonging. It was a war that would define the region for generations to come. This wasn't just a war fought on battlefields. It was a war that invaded homes and uprooted lives. The fallout was immense, with a significant number of people displaced from their ancestral lands. Families were torn apart, homes were lost, and a sense of belonging was irretrievably shattered. It's estimated that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced during this period, forced to leave behind everything they knew and held dear. And then there was the resentment, a deep-seated anger that seeped into the hearts of those who felt betrayed and abandoned. The war might have ended, but the battle for dignity and justice was far from over. The resentment was mutual, with both sides feeling wronged and victimized. This resentment has been passed down from generation to generation, fueling the conflict and making any form of reconciliation seem like a distant dream. But amidst the rubble and the resentment, there were also stories of resilience. Stories of people who, despite the odds, clung to the hope of a better tomorrow. They were the ones who believed in the possibility of coexistence, in the power of understanding and mutual respect. The land was divided, but the people were more divided than ever. The War of 1948 wasn't just a historical event, it was a defining moment that continues to shape the narrative of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A moment that to this day echoes in the hearts and minds of those who call this land their home. In the decades that followed, peace remained elusive. As the dust settled from the 1948 war, the world hoped for calm. But the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was far from over. The 1960s and 70s saw a series of wars and skirmishes, each escalating the tension. Yet amid this turmoil, there were attempts to broker peace. The 1978 Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt was a significant stride, resulting in the first ever peace treaty between Israel and an Arab state. But the quest for a comprehensive peace was still a distant dream. The Oslo Accords of the 1990s, designed to fulfill the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, was seen by many as a beacon of hope. It proposed a gradual transfer of power to the Palestinians, a plan that was met with both jubilation and skepticism. Tragically, the optimism was short-lived. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a key figure in the Accords, dealt a major blow to the peace process. The Second Intifada, or uprising in the early 2000s, further deepened the divide as violence erupted on an unprecedented scale. Each ceasefire, each negotiation brought a glimmer of hope, only to be extinguished by renewed violence. The emotional scars of this conflict run deep, making a resolution immensely challenging. The mere mention of peace negotiations often stirs up feelings of skepticism and cynicism, fueled by a history of broken promises and unfulfilled hopes. Yet, the pursuit of peace never ceases. The 21st century has seen a renewed push for dialogue and de-escalation. From the Arab Peace Initiative to the more recent Abraham Accords, efforts are being made to create a climate conducive to resolving the conflict. But the road to peace is not an easy one. It's a path paved with memories of promises broken, trust betrayed, and dreams shattered. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just a political issue, It's a deeply emotional saga, with generations of Israelis and Palestinians caught in its tumultuous wake. The quest for peace continues, but the path is fraught with memories of promises broken. So we're left with a question: whose land is it? This isn't a question with a cut-and-dry answer. It's an intricate tapestry of narratives woven from a myriad of perspectives. It's a question that bears the weight of thousands of years of history, each layer adding its own complex patterns to the fabric of the present conflict. It's a question that has been shaped by the footprints of ancient civilizations, by promises made and broken, by wars and displacement, by the struggle for identity and the yearning for home. It's a question that echoes in the heart of every Palestinian, every Israeli, and reverberates across the globe. Every proposed answer is met with a counter-narrative, a different interpretation of history. Each side clings to their version of the past, their claim to the land. Yet amidst the cacophony of voices and viewpoints, there is a common thread, a hope for peaceful coexistence. The answer isn't simple, but the hope for peaceful coexistence persists. As we've seen, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a complex web of history, emotions, and promises. From the early 20th century to the present day, we've navigated through a labyrinth of betrayals, enduring tensions, and attempts at peace. This isn't just a question of land, but a mosaic of identities, narratives, and interpretations. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Remember, understanding is the first step towards peace. Don't forget to subscribe for more historical insights.